off the next part of this with me. My name is Bryan Darr. A little bit about me really quick. I worked in Germany and Japan. That's probably the most interesting thing about me right now. And surprisingly enough, working as a public school teacher in Japan and working across different cultures in Germany gave me a lot of skills that I did not expect to work nearly as well as they turned out to work in corporate America. Things like listening skills and mild hostage negotiation tactics, which I might talk about later. So what I really enjoy doing, though, is making things, optimizing things and making them more efficient, and especially focusing on people in that. So building systems that really interact with people, not forcing people to interact with the systems I build. And that's what I really enjoy doing. So today, I'm going to talk about governance for growth and best practices. Basically, Steve did a nice job outlaying the theoretical, and I'm going to show specifically within JIRA and Confluence how to put governance into practice. That's the first part. After that, I'm going to talk about some best practices for each of those, just from an administrative perspective. There's probably some things that we could all do better, and I'm also looking for feedback from everybody else to share, because that's why it's a forum and not just a lecture. And then finally, if we have time, I've got some soft skills, like I said, listening skills from a crisis counseling line that I used to work on, and which actually parlay into some hostage negotiation tactics that are surprisingly people-focused, if we have time for that, but we might not. So also, we're probably going to split up what I'm doing around lunch, so don't think that this is going to drag out to 2 p.m. All right, so Steve is goading me into talking about a story, and that's great. So when we were working with a bank in Canada, going through and building out the tools that Steve was just describing in theory, one of the most exciting things that happened was, as we walked through each individual committee that we were forming, it would take about 15 minutes for people to stare at the slide and go, oh, this sounds like more work. And then very slowly, the smile would increase on their face because they realized that this would become far less work for themselves. So the tools that we're building really do build consensus and build teamwork around a process that people don't have to waste their time on. As we said, we really try to reduce the number of meetings that we have to do by using JIRA and Confluence to do what they're designed to do, to reduce meetings and to increase team communication. So almost all of what I present, though, is going to be actually in the tool. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to swipe over to this guy, and we're going to come right into our playground instance of Confluence. Everyone should have a playground. This is ours. And we're going to land in a space that we created called Atlassian Governance. So let me make sure that I'm on track here. So specifically, as all these tools relate to the APAG and ASAG and the ASC, we want to get all of their knowledge into this system so that everybody can see it and interact with it. And hopefully, this will reduce the number of emails and phone calls and hallway conversations that you need to have to really keep this to keep the ship going. Of course, this also feeds into the bottom-up structure that we're doing. You have the committees create documentation. You have the users add to that documentation. You still do need a captain steering the ship. So up at the ASC, you definitely need somebody saying, this is where we're going. Here's the tools to go with it. And these are the tools that you build to support that. So the purpose of Confluence is to give everybody information right when they need it. And this would be the landing page that we'd use. So it would explain why we're doing Atlassian Governance. And again, this is very generic. You'll need to customize this to your own company. It has various diagrams that you would use to explain the governance setup. And then based in the space directory, if I expand over here, we have a governance structure, we have policies and standards, and then we have how-to articles. But of course, focusing on the user, we keep all of that down here. How-to articles already expanded, ready to go for your users to get the information they need instead of coming to you. Before I go into those, though, I want to talk about the blog feature of Confluence. This is possibly one of the best ways to announce changes that you're making to your Atlassian products. So instead of having to send out an official communication throughout the company, you could just write a blog post. This is one right here. We made some changes. We updated structure. We updated the epic to feature translator. And you could add anything else. And as long as people come and watch this space, and you can encourage watching in Confluence as a company culture, they will get an email update every time one of your space administrators sends out a blog post about updates to all of your Atlassian products. So no more extra emails, at least from a drafting standpoint. Over here, we have how-to articles, and we have chunked these down into various sections. So basically based on Atlassian product. And if you like this structure so much, you could throw in how-to articles for the rest of the products that your teams are using as well. So Bitbucket user how-to articles, these are usually pretty few and far between because developers are particularly good at Googling and figuring things out for themselves, so you don't really need to build these out as much. However, when we hit to Confluence, we could include things like how to add dynamic content. And this is a really good example of labeling things appropriately for the end user. So macro doesn't mean anything except maybe a virus-laden Word document from the 90s. So instead, if you say dynamic content, people might respond a little bit better to that, and you sort of nudge them into the macro language there. You might make a how to bring your JIRA data into Confluence page. So one of the best parts about Confluence and JIRA, and the reason that we're paying per user to use Confluence, is because they talk so well to each other. So encouraging your users via help documents that they bump into while they're here, go, oh, I can put my JIRA data in Confluence? That sounds great. I've always been wanting to document my software project like that. How to collaborate in Confluence, this is another one. So this is actually something that we teach in our classes, and I'm sure you've noticed that, and we were having a conversation about this at dinner last night, maybe your Confluence users aren't particularly keen on using the tool because nobody's ever showed them how. But if you point them all in the direction of a general help repository, now they can go, oh, I can collaborate with this tool? Fantastic. I can watch, I can comment, I can assign tasks, I can do all these things that you would have to come to one of our lovely training classes for, but you can put that into a how-to document right here. How to create and edit a page, same idea. A lot of people only read in Confluence, and they don't realize that it is a democratized information repository, so they can create their own content. They might not know how. And then also how to work with files and images. This would be one of those little additional things that you bump into over the course of using the tool that you realize that a lot of people don't know how to do, so therefore you throw in another help document. Of course, the organization of this is extremely important, and you want somebody that has a very broad mind to the user base to curate these documents in an order and in a titling manner that makes sense. So that just depends on your organization. I know that one of the problems with documentation is as soon as you write it, it's out of date. So I tend to write little notes, little warnings up at the top. Please check page history to see the last time this was updated to see if it's still useful for you. This page will be updated on request, but will not be consistently updated. So you can put warnings like that to help you out. Then we come down to JIRA user how-to articles. So you can break this down to various add-ons as well. If the add-on is mostly JIRA focused, we could learn all about help for portfolio for JIRA. So how to set up a portfolio plan. You could point managers to this, or you could point directors to this. And then we get into things like, just basic information about the tools. How are JIRA projects structured? Maybe your subject matter experts really would like to know more about notification schemes and what they can do. So you can point them to this instead of having to have more of those hallway conversations. How to build a personal Kanban or Scrum board. This one's huge, right? That's one of the major benefits of JIRA, and yet most people never realize that they need to share their filter. So maybe you could put that in big, blink text. Luckily, Confluence does not support that, but perhaps a warning text at the top. None of this will work unless you share your filter. Click on this page to find out how to share your filter. How to build a dashboard, same thing. And giving examples. So you can create company-wide best practice examples and throw them into this company-wide Confluence space. How to create a filter. Common problems. Why can't I see my data, my issues, my project? How to edit your user profile, although with the new privacy, that might not matter. And then, various how-to articles, much like up here with Portfolio, but these are less used add-ons, for example, in this instance, or structure for JIRA help files, if you use structure for JIRA. Some of my coworkers who are watching right now do. So that is how-to articles in a nutshell, and you want to keep those up front because most people, when they come to this page, are looking for help. Going up the list, though, and this is the part that I really like. So obviously, these over here are mirrored with these over here. It just depends on if your users are savvy enough to use the sidebar versus the page. So here we can come to governance structure, and this will explain all about how our governance works. Everything that Steve talked about before, all that information as it pertains to your company is here. So one of the things that we do when we go work with companies is we sit down in those small meetings and we build this out with them. And it really is kind of an exciting process because people go, oh yes, I know, Joe is the guy to do this. He's going to be in this position. He can write this document for us. And we sort of build it right there. That's the magic of Confluence. It's collaborative. So you would have a page that would explain your Atlassian steering committee, and it would explain the purpose of it, the structure, the members. It would have meeting notes if you want. So Confluence has this neat functionality called meeting notes. It's a blueprint. You can basically log meeting notes, and then it stores them in a repository, so you can always reference back to them. So your ASC can have full documentation on what happened if minutes are very important to your company, which I imagine they are if you're a large company. Then we hop down into the APAG group. So we have the Atlassian Products Administration group. And again, the same thing, the purpose of it, the structure, the members, the meeting notes, tasks to be done, etc. If you don't know about tasks in Confluence, they're pretty fun, but you can also track them in JIRA as well. And then we have the ASAG, and this is just a repetition of this. But of course, the members might switch out a little bit more for this. So you might just have a whole backlog of members sitting in the wings waiting. And specifically, this is really important. It actually explains, and I find this very, very helpful. For some people, the difference between the system infrastructure and the UI-based configuration, they might not know the difference. So you can point them here to understand which committee is handling which. Then, if you're not using JIRA to track all this stuff, which I'm going to show in a minute, let's not look at that, you can track a decision log. So you can, Confluence also provides a blueprint and then a stacking set of decisions, and you can store those within Confluence as well. To track all the major decisions that your committees have made. So we're going to this workflow now. We're going to scale JIRA in this way. We are no longer going to allow end users to close issues or whatever. That could all be tracked here if that works for your company. Then, of course, the ever important how to initiate a policy change, grassroots movement. I would like to make a change in my JIRA instance. I'm going to come here. I'm going to learn how, and then I'm going to start that process over in JIRA, which I'll show us in a minute. And then we have different committee responsibility areas. So depending on what your JIRA system is or how your Bitbucket is set up, you might have various parts of the UI administration delegated out to different groups. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Maybe sometimes you want only a particular committee group to handle this versus a particular committee group to handle this. And they're all kind of mixed in together with JIRA. So we've broken those out here in our example. Any questions so far about the how-to articles, the governance structure, and how we're tracking this in Confluence? Cool. All right. So then we hit policies and standards. So just for me, I broke these up between administrators and all users. And the reason why is because a lot of the stuff that pertains to setting up JIRA really doesn't matter for the rest of the user group. But here's some examples. So how do we archive our projects as a company to respect our data retention policies? I'm going to rename this right now, and I'm going to, wow, that is embarrassing. I'm not going to rename that right now, but I would call this configuration element maintenance. So this is going to be all about how we only do create projects on shared configuration within JIRA, or how we try to use as few schema as possible in our instance, or when we do find superfluous items such as extra issue types, et cetera, how do we clean those up? And what are the rules for making a new issue type? Because we don't want all of our configuration elements to get so big that it's so arduous for the administrators to use. But this is all just admin focused. Then this is one of my favorites here, breaking integrations that you need to be aware of when making changes. So for example, within our company, all of our public classes are fed out of JIRA. All the data is in JIRA. And if you change a field name as an administrator, you will break our sales pages. So I've got a whole grid in our system that says what item in JIRA you have, and then what are the various applications that are reading from JIRA, and then what things within there will break and how to fix them if you break them. So we use an add-on called Query Feed, which basically takes a JSON dump of whatever filter you have within JIRA, posts it, and then another application can read from it. So if I change, again, field names, if I change field values in those fields, that would be a problem. So pointing your administrators here, sort of a tread at your own risk if you're going to affect any of these. Then we have user access configuration. So this is how we do user access. This is how we manage our groups. Do we manage them internally or externally? And I'm sure we can think of 100 other things to add in here that are very important for administrators that nobody else really needs to know about. So if you want, you could use Confluence's page permissioning. You could even hide this particular tree from the rest of the users and only share it with the JIRA administrators or administrators group if you want, just to avoid clutter. And I might recommend that because for a lot of people, the less they see, the easier it is to go through, as opposed to piling them up with lots of information and overwhelming them. All right. Then we have policies and standards for everybody. Now, if you're using scaled JIRA, or if you have, like, let's say 50% of your JIRA users are doing software development, and then you have, little 10% groups here, they're using it for HR or for, business processes or for marketing or sales. I might break these down into those groups because HR probably doesn't need to know about how our company has decided to do estimation, for example. And you might not need to know the software hierarchy for software projects if you're over in HR. That's also up to you. So basically, policies and standards, that's because it's a mix. Policies are things that we decided on as a committee, voted on and approved, and are now implementing. Standards are just kind of best practices that we don't want to forget. So we have our issue hierarchy. We also have permissions in portfolio. So if we have created various groups and we want people to know who are the intended members of those, so when they're building their plans, this is who we're going to put into these various groups. Because this is also confusing as well for things like roles within projects. Like if you're a software company, yeah, Scrum Master, product owner, developer, that's all very, very clear. But if you're the HR person and as an admin you have restricted the role namings because these are database-wide roles or instance-wide roles, I mean. What is a Scrum Master in HR? So you might either need to create a new role name and just have people understand that that's out there, or you might need to translate that and point them to here when the project administrator is assigning those roles. Then we have policies for add-ons. This could be very, very broad. This could be the way that we add add-ons. This could be when or when we don't do add-ons. This could explain the process for the committee grassroots movement to implement an add-on. Or this could be policy specifically for specific add-ons. Obviously, for every company, it's going to be very different. Then we have statuses, resolutions, and priorities. This is where I want to point all of my end users when they ask for a new status or a new resolution. We already have all of these. And of course, you can always click the question mark when you go to create an issue next to issue type, but nobody knows that. So you could either frequently update it or infrequently, it doesn't matter, update it here. Or you could say, we have one resolution for complete. It is called done. We don't have resolved complete. We don't have resolved. We don't have complete. It's just done. And point people to that. Same with statuses. Here's a list of the statuses that we find the most useful. And maybe here's an example of when we add new statuses upon request. Standard workflows. I think a lot of people, even though there's a button on everyone's issue that says view workflow, I think a lot of people don't understand that they can view the workflow, or they might not be aware of the other workflows available. So if you have software teams that like to do UAT within their sprint, or if they like to do UAT in their release cycle, you could have two different workflows, one for each. That's something I do at a company right now. However, people might not have ever seen that other workflow. So you could post that here and make that available for them to decide between the two workflows if they find one more useful than the other. And they may see other workflows get inspired. Now, we'll get in later on within best practices about in a very large company, you might want to restrict the workflows available. But in a small company, yeah, you really can create custom workflows for just about everybody. And pointing them here is quite helpful for that. Yes.
So I know that you work a lot with companies around helping them standardize workflows, statuses, resolutions, priorities, roles, groups, and things like that. While you're on the topic, can I borrow your expertise to maybe explain how you've been successful with that and some of the things that you've done in those areas?
Listening, and more listening. Nobody will listen to you until they're convinced that you understand what they feel. So getting all the right people in the room, or at least enough of the right people in the room, and saying, okay, almost like the Marie Kondo cleaning method. Like, let's get all your junk on one table and see what we need, and then understand how we can slice it, how we can fold this into a group, how we can fold you into a role. Wow, that is a really ridiculous metaphor. But yeah, just listening to them and throwing everything in one place, usually on a spreadsheet. I find that's the easiest way to sort these out first. And then, for example, for roles, if you're a small company, you can do roles by almost really empowering project admins. You could do a role by various permissions. You could do a role by various notifications. If you're a large company, you would really have to decide, we have thousands of users. These people are Scrum Masters. These people are product owners. But mostly just listening within committee. Every group is different. But as long as you listen to them first and get everything that they want to say out first, then you can start drafting together. So it's a really collaborative, human, soft effort, I think. There's no one solution for everybody. So if you listen and you form it together, and it's a really fun process, actually. I mean, you saw when we were in Canada, people just light up when you make something that works for them. It's very rewarding. Did I touch on all those, or is there a specific one you wanted me to?
Yeah.
Cool.
That was really good. I just know you've had a lot of experience with helping people navigate that. So
it's fun.
Yeah.
When doesn't it work?
It's like you paint this great picture of like, hey, let's all talk.
I can tell you exactly when it doesn't work.
When Brian's not doing it.
No, I can tell you exactly when it doesn't work. When you have conflicting egos in the room, very big egos that have lots of, and this is going to sound a little hooey in a way, but like just a lot of stake in their own personal self-worth wrapped up in what the role is going to be called or what the workflow is going to be. And so kind of just like working with them as a human being, to be like, I understand that you have goals here, and honestly, listening works so well. But yeah, when it doesn't work is when you have conflicting people in a room, in a meeting especially, and they just want to tear each other apart. So when that happens, one of the better ways is to go individually and talk to them one-on-one and sort of socialize. I guess that's the Agile term, is socializing new information and socializing ideas. And so by the time you get into the meeting, you can point to the one guy that's never going to agree with anything and say, the only person against this new world is you. And then they have to go with it. That's sort of brutal, but yeah, sorry, Ian. But if you socialize it and normalize it one-on-one, people have a much easier time adopting it because they've already given their input. That's a really good question. Other questions? Sorry, Greg, you had a question?
Oh, just thinking, like, after you've done all that, we'll always end up with one project that says we're still different than everyone else.
Yeah. You're right.
How do you resolve that?
So the question is, how do you resolve the one project that's special? So in a small company, no problem. Everyone's special. Everyone can have whatever workflow they want. But if you know you're going to scale, then you obviously start creating more and more standardized things. There's some things you can do to allow special people to do special things. Components is built into the projects. You could add like a standard text field that people would use. But there really may be a special project. So for example, we have a project that tracks all of our private classes, and it's sort of a billing related project. That really does have to have its own workflow because that catches missed billing, that catches notifications, that it makes sure that the instructor goes to the right city on the right date. I've never made that mistake myself, knock on wood. I actually did. So for those, I think it really is special. For everybody else, talking to them and having the other workflows available and explaining why we have standardization. So we have standardization because it reduces administrative overhead. Well, you don't care about that, but I do when I'm taking care of 10,000 people. We have standardization because it allows you to transfer across teams more easily. We have standardization because it allows for better reporting, so nobody comes and taps you on your shoulder every 3 days and says, where is this? So helping them understand more about that, I find that helps, but they might still be special, and they might still need their own thing. Do you have any other ideas to that? Because I would love to hear more of you too.
I've got 700 projects, so
yeah,
getting commonality across them is very difficult.
Right. Well, and obviously from an administrator's perspective, outcome versus output, I think, is really important to remember, because when I have to scroll past 72 issue types to do a workflow change on the mapping, it's extremely frustrating. But at the same time, if I know what I'm looking for and I can do that quickly, it might actually be more worth it to my time to focus on something else rather than cleaning that up. I think it really depends on what the benefit is. If you know we're moving to a new system in 2 years, it's probably not worth cleaning up at all. If you know you can build a new system, burn it down and build it again, that might be better. But yeah, that's a lot of projects, 1,700 to deal with. Yeah, Ian.
So that reminds me that I think that this is not just a binary. There isn't just.
Oh, here comes the mic.
You're about ready to talk.
So I think one thought is that it's within JIRA think of it more than just binary. It isn't just like standard and special case.
Right.
That there are dimensions, right? So there are, and you can have different ways of doing variation on the dimension. So for example, it might be, okay, every project in like we're going to have thousands of projects. We never want to get over 1,000 custom fields. Each one of you get one custom field. No, right? So there's like dimensions of this that you can delegate to the teams to be special on while keeping maybe the standardized workflow, but you get your custom field.
Yeah.
Or, right? So there are variations that you can decide on. Within the JIRA world, there are some dimensions that should be treated as scarce resources because they have an impact on performance.
Permission schemes and custom fields specifically, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just a thought there, like maybe backing away from the thought of it is either standard or variation, and realizing there are some dimensions on which you can have some give on. Knowing what those are can like maybe relieve some of the pressure about like, but everybody wants to be special.
Well, and also,
I look at it as this spider graph between custom field and issue types. They all get pulled into information for that. But at what point do you cross the boundary where that is now your biggest problem?
so the question is, what are the biggest performance constraint elements within JIRA, I guess, right?
There's a list that shows all the impact.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say which degree you impact.
Not,
So you can't really say which one's scarce.
I don't know if they've done the
not
research.
directly, but there is a kind of indirection in terms of the we have this performance what do we call it, benchmark that classifies people into small, medium, large, extra large, and I think those become like there are like 8 dimensions or 8 attributes, like workflows, custom fields, issues, projects. I can't remember all 8, but and then the benchmarks, I think, actually do give you a sense of like, well, okay, we're a large company. We'll probably have this many users. Let's calibrate the other dimensions to that same level, right? So that you kind of even those out, and that's going to, I think, help keep performance like at a scale that Atlassian understands. If you start to go off the chart towards the extra large in any one dimension, support starts to like, well, maybe you should shrink that, right? That's just the unfamiliar territory.
Just grow as a blob. Not
Yeah,
as
so
a,
you measure all those dimensions, but it's really hard to understand which direction any one of those could go that would cause a problem. Like if you do more for the workflow, then you'll commercial that. So you've had that
Yeah,
conversation.
I see what you're saying now.
So all those dimensions, when you go dashboard showing all those, that's guide, it's like that performance guide for enterprise customers is really on the low side. Like it looks
Right.
like a million issues, right? I could probably think about a dozen customers with over 1 million issues now. So we have to measure in all these different dimensions, and even now we don't know how much runway we've got, right? We don't know, is this going to be a problem for us in a year, 2 years, 3 years? And so we're starting to run a scaling project where we can say, okay, go and add 10 million issues. Like, does that dimension affect us? Go and add 100 workflows. Does that dimension? And so, yeah, there isn't that guy.
sounds like you guys should be collaborating together and sharing some stats.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking about a scarce resource. Like, are we measuring the wrong things, or are we go down that standardization path on workflows, and it solves our problem really well, but then it causes problems for people who are building product. And so we're going to work out, do we want to make it their problem or our problem? And yeah, I think it's pretty hard.
Yeah, I think like when you have software teams, and obviously some agile culture just crazy, you can standardize them to a certain amount, and really gain that shared element economy of scale there. Whereas, like, let's say that your first HR team, they might be the ones blazing a trail, and you're not going to know how many HR teams are going to go with this. So I'd build it best for them, but keeping in mind that you never want a status that is specific, if possible. Of course, there's always exceptions. That's like HR team A ready, and sort of guiding them in that way. Really an experienced JIRA administrator, I think, which you probably are, can just kind of knows like instinctively, like, I don't need a resolution that is so specific to this one group. However, the workflow might need to be specific, and therefore I can give them custom transitions that would accomplish the goals that they have and the checks and balances they have. And then the next HR team that comes on, you sort of expand that a little bit, and then pretty soon you might have a standard thing for that whole division. But that's the problem of JIRA and companies, and that's the cognitive dissonance that I have of, like, I love cleaning and having things tidy. Like, I want all of my configuration elements to be pristine. And my boss, who calls himself my chaos monkey, is constantly throwing things in there. And it's good because that's reality. Reality's messy. And so learning to live with that discomfort, and that's more of a mindfulness thing, but it helps. That and some beers. Cool. All right. I think what I'll do is wrap up the Confluence portion, and then we'll probably do lunch, and then I'll come back and do JIRA and best practices. But you guys can let me know in about 10 minutes when I wrap this up. So policies in progress is kind of fun. This is a great way to use the old JIRA macro or a filter macro. I'm not sure which one this is because I lost my license, so I couldn't actually tell you. I'm gonna have to tell our guy in Poland about that. But here I've got a bunch of dummy issues that are currently in progress. I think the filter is something like, project is governance and resolution is empty, and probably created after a certain date. So you can, if you have users that are not as familiar with JIRA, you can point them to this page and say, well, this is where your thing is. Or of course, if they're used to JIRA, you can have them watch a particular issue that they're interested in. So yeah, so that's the Confluence side of things. I started with that because for me, Confluence really is where people come together to talk about processes, whereas JIRA is where they come together to look at work in progress. So I find that starting in Confluence when we work with clients is really the best way to start building these structures, because we can write it out and draft it, and then we can put it into place over in JIRA.
You've obviously talked a lot about documentation within JIRA and how-tos and things like that. Working for a company that has a very active Confluence site, that is, there's a whole lot of culture within our organization to, it goes in Confluence as blog, as page. As
that organization being Atlassian, by the way. Yes.
So, so to kind of pull back those curtains a little bit, one of the things that I find is that the whole, like, there's tribal knowledge in there. You guys have very structured policy around here. Like, maybe talk about maybe some of the things that you've seen in there that would help an organization like us that kind of like everything gets thrown into the fan. To help kind of unwind some of those threads.
Yeah, like when you hit questions for Confluence and clearly the only thing functioning is the search bar because scrolling through 15,000 questions is not going to get you the answer you need. It's kind of like Reddit, I guess. I mean, in a way, right? Like, it's kind of the Reddit problem. What specifically do I want to go look at? And so I think that for something like this, carving out a really reserved space where only a certain group of administrators are curating this space because this has to do with governance. I think that's very important. Pointing people to the single source of truth for exactly how we're doing things. Whereas with like questions for Confluence or tribal knowledge on teams, it's almost a different problem, right? So that team needs to know where to go to find their knowledge. So at least setting up the spaces. I wouldn't necessarily give everybody space, create permissions in a company that large, because otherwise you might even wind up getting redundant spaces. And I know that Confluence, much like JIRA, can really balloon out of control with like labels and spaces and so many pages. And at least there's add-ons that'll help you kind of curate that. Finding pages that haven't been updated in the last 100 years or so. But yeah, I think it depends on the purpose, and I don't mean to equivocate there, but if it's a single source of truth, it needs to be here. If it's tribal knowledge, that could be team focused. And maybe that's just part of onboarding. Like, here are the spaces we're using. But if you reduce the number of users that can create spaces, you might cull that problem a little bit. Would that help you guys at all, do you think? Or like what are your ideas for that? Or if you could start over, what would you have done? That's the Intel question, staring at the Ferris wheel. Should we go into memory again? Oh, we should go into computer
I
chips.
think you have a good point on onboarding, but I think that team practice and culture is different. So
Right.
when people swap things over and it's like, oh, I'm going to write out some instructions. Well, one team that gets documented one way in one place, and another team that goes in somewhere else, and another.
Right.
So, like, I think that's the just as a user, that's a frustrating part. You
Yeah.
know? So I spend a lot of time in search. Like, I know this is in here, or I've seen the page, or you start,
Right.
there's those games that you play to say, here's how I'm going to find this again. And so I don't know if there's a right answer, but I think it's the Swiss Army knife that Confluence is.
Yeah.
There's two sides to that.
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, totally.
At one level, I love it because it's like it's in there, but at the other level, I hate it because it's in there somewhere. So.
Yeah, Ian?
Yeah, I think and what I observe is that, like, I don't know, I'm not sure I even want to have answer the question, what would you do without history? That's sort of one of the great experiments of our unique Confluence instance, is that it demonstrates how much history means. Like it's there, and it's rather immovable.
Are you guys scared of losing that history? I mean, is there like an emotional tie to that in a way?
No, I would be. I like, after lunch, we'll be talking about something that I could only have learned through exploring Confluence
interesting.
history.
Okay.
But there's, I think there's like one of the things that I think people don't quite realize, though, is like how to respect history while also being empowered to make improvements. And I think that's like increasingly as we get new people in, we aren't quite connecting the dots between our values and something like be the change you seek. And yeah, that means it's okay to move Confluence pages. Like, we
oh
just
my
have to draw
gosh,
the connection,
yes.
right? So I think it's like, we may need our own Confluence training. I don't maybe.
Well, and Confluence, unlike JIRA, really reflects human organization. I mean, humans grow, and the reason that I asked the emotion question is, I mean, with this culture of cleaning up right now, I think that people really do become emotionally attached to their history. That sometimes might mean everything, but sometimes it literally is just a trophy, and therefore it could go away eventually because you've moved on to a different job, and maybe with an add-on to pull up stats about number of page views, the one that hasn't gotten any views in 6 years, that could probably go away. I've always hoped that somebody would invent for the internet something that just slowly erases things, much like human minds slowly erase things, and then occasionally brings back something to make you go, oh yeah, that was embarrassing. But yeah.
I think sometimes that history is really like there's a lot of interesting cultural things about Atlassian inside those pages. and you can read as much into that as you want to. And there's something great about that because I think that does reflect who we are as an organization.
Yeah.
So to your point of if it's tacit knowledge or something very tactical, that probably does need to get put away in a box somewhere. But then some of the stuff that just reflects who we are, that's funky and quirky and funny, and I think it's really, I'll stumble upon a page, 5 years old, and it's God, that's really insightful,
Insightful and useful, or is it just a comfortable walk down memory lane, much like pulling out your old high school yearbooks?
I would say both.
Okay, all right.
I think in both of those, I think they're really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, emotionally, the yearbook's great, but it hasn't helped me since. Whereas some of this knowledge might be helpful. So I would like keep in mind, is this useful knowledge or is this cute and fun for a party? If it's fun for a party, save it and throw it up on a slideshow.
So I don't want us to get too far into a question that I actually have for the panel later this afternoon, because we're starting to go there. But I'm going to bring this question back up later on this afternoon's panel, because I think you're touching on something that I think is really helpful to explore.